All right, so we'll kick it off with Andrea and Shane on issue 6.
Okay, sounds good. I am going to do the feature demo portion, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so here in this window, I am logged into my account. This is a fresh instance, nothing clicked or saved in state yet. And in the back, I have Firestore open in this tab so that you can see Shane's lists, since we're going to be adding to his accounts. So if I were logged in as a user and I didn't click anything and I went straight to manage list, sorry, our issue is I want to be able to invite others to an existing shopping list. Probably should have prefaced with that. So if I went to manage list and I put in Shane's email, try to send an invite, I get an alert that tells me, hey, you need to actually pick a list to share. So, okay, now as a user, I know I have to go back to home to select a list, and I'm going to pick a different list. This happens to be a list that I know I didn't create and was shared with me. So let's go ahead and try that. And when I do that, then we have an alert that tells me that the list isn't mine to share. So, okay, so now I know that as a user, I have to pick one that I created as well. And so going back to home, I click this particular list, and you can see that in Shane's lists, none of these things got added yet. And I'm going to go ahead and share again. And this time it tells us you shared successfully. I click OK. And then back here, you see that the list got added to his document in the database. So let's say I was trying to share it with somebody who hasn't signed in yet, so they don't have an account, they're not in our database. If I send an invite, the alert tells us the user does not yet exist. And let's say, for example, as I was typing out the email, I made a typo, so maybe there's a space. We have front-end validation that tells us what to fix so that it kind of covers the basics of input validation, kind of like the simple side of things. I think that's it. So I'm going to hand it over to Shane to walk through our code.
And then share my screen. And I'll try to walk through the code in about the same order that you just saw everything. Let's see here. So, first off, within the share list function of Firebase.jsx, a couple of those first checks that we put in where if list path dot includes current user ID, that's where we're checking if that user is the owner. And we have like very nice comments in here from Andrea as we move along if you do want to check that on your side too. So we check if it's the user's list to share by double checking the list path that is in Firebase itself. And if it doesn't, we use that to throw a new error up to the try and catch block that we'll look at in just a bit. If it then checks for whether or not the user has logged in or essentially has like a path in that Firebase by seeing if there's a document after the resulting await get doc on 152. And if it doesn't exist, then it throws an alert that way, as you saw just a little bit ago. Let me see here. Let me move this video. Let's see here. Not yours to share. Does not exist. I'm just going through like the branch itself as well. Backup in app. I wanted to show the only change we made to app itself was that we passed the user ID, so we could pass it down. I'm sorry, we used pass the user ID to manage list. And then within managed list, we use that for a couple of those later checks. You can think of them after we hit the Firebase side of things. And then we have the user ID coming up here again. And we're using that here in that await share list. That's where we're passing it in to check some of that validation on the Firebase side, and then sort of like use that try catch right here. See here, and then this is that checking if there is a list that was clicked on by the user initially. If there's no list path, you get that prompt, please select a list to share. Something that we started going down the bunny trail for, but we kind of stopped ourselves partway through, was we were curious how we would check for the existence of the list already in the recipient's collection. We weren't quite sure if this would currently allow duplicates or if Firebase had like built-in aspects of the way that we add things, if it would check that already. So that's something that we might want to double check in the future. As we pursued it though, it sort of seemed like it might take another like query to the database to see if that document already existed, but we weren't quite sure and we didn't want to add that onto this issue itself. So we kind of just perched that for now. Let me see here. And then, oh, the form itself. The form itself is right down here. Kind of what you would expect in general from like the input and labeling. Something that we did find was that as we set that type to email, that has built-in validation, so to speak, of it looks for that at symbol, it looks for that .com or dot something symbol. That was just one sort of like built-in HTML validation tool that we had. Let's see here. Is there anything I'm missing? Shared success. Oh, here we go. This is manage list on 31. Oh yeah, and then the submit itself, we ended up changing the naming convention for the item and the sharing sort of inputs because this is almost where it might be convenient to turn them into their own components so that it's not quite a long list of things that seem kind of similar. Might be useful to separate things up when we start feeling like that. I think that's about it though. Let's see here. Is there anything that I missed that you all were curious about? I'll put it that way.
Any questions from the rest of the team? One question I have, I saw that you are preventing a user from sharing a list that they did not create. Is that a limitation on Firebase, or is that a decision that y'all made about like how the sharing functionality should work? I don't believe I saw it mentioned in the AC, but I might have missed it. What was the reasoning for that functionality?
Let's see here. I'm not positive. It almost seemed like
Oh, is that something that has been added to the like the
I think
starting?
it's just like added that because it felt like a way to avoid duplication or like an error
Yeah.
handling. But I'm not positive if we just sort of like it seemed like the next thing to do or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I in my head I was like, oh yeah, it's part of the AC, but then now I'm looking at it. I'm like, no, it isn't. So I
No,
guess
I mean, I think that's a valid like decision to make. I feel like that I could see it going either way, and I think that like it's always interesting to see how people interpret AC. Like I think that's a valid interpretation of like how to share things. But yeah, just interesting to note. Um, nice. I also really liked the front end validation that y'all were doing. Like I appreciate as we've been going week by week, y'all have been giving really helpful like error messages or success messages, and then even just like the front end validation on the email. Just making sure that we're helping the user as much as we can. I think that's like really nice user experience. So kudos on this issue. Any other questions or comments from anyone?
um I think a comment I had when we were refactoring, it was really helpful to kind of learn a little bit more about throwing new errors and how like we originally had some little warning that we had unreachable code. And that's because I think Shane and I were both a little rusty or real unused to like the error handling side of things, and knowing that, you know, when you throw a new error, it essentially just stops your function kind of dead in its tracks. And so anything that happens after it isn't ever going to be reached. A
Yeah.
little fun nugget.
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes that happens, especially when you're like adding things and then moving things around, and then you realize that there's just like a little appendage that is just hanging out there and not doing anything. So yeah, that's another reason why it's always helpful to have peer review, because someone's going in completely fresh without the context of like, oh, this is what we were doing with this originally. So yeah, wonderful. Any other questions or comments on this issue slash feature? Really nice job. This is like, it's really starting to come together and feel like a professional app, you know, like you have the option to share it with someone. So very legit, and nice job this week. And all right, let's go ahead, give them a round of applause. And we'll move on to our other pair to discuss issue 7.
All right, so I'm gonna demo issue 7. Let me share my screen with you. So our issue was to be able to filter the items in a list. So move this out of my way. So I'm just gonna show you what it looks like when you're not signed in. So right now, on the home page, there's no list. Oh, you know what? Excuse me. I think maybe this might still be in my application. I meant to clear this. 1 second. Okay, I'm gonna remove this for now, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. So right now, when we don't have a list stored in local storage or have a list selected, there's nothing to filter, so nothing's going to happen. So that's what that looks like. I'm gonna go back in and sign in. So now that we have our lists, I will select dinner and then navigate to the list page. So we have this form that we've added at the top for the user to be able to filter an item. So this form is, of course, keyboard navigate. Sorry, you can navigate using a keyboard. So I'll just tab into there. So the user can filter items by typing in the name of an item, and this should match any part of the word. So if I type GG, it's going to match the middle portion of these words here. It will also match the end of a word. So if I do yes, we're getting pickles. And then the list should re-render as the user types so that we're seeing only things that match. So for each letter that they add, it's going to change what's appearing. And then the user has the option of deleting what they've typed, or they can use this reset key, which can be clicked either with the mouse or using the enter key on the keyboard. And we also implemented letter casing checks. So typing in caps lock or lowercase will not affect. And yeah, I think that is about it for the demo.
Okay. And I will go through the code. So we luckily only had to update one file this week. And interestingly, when we got together to pair program, we both of us sort of like initially defaulted to thinking we had to modify the backend to modify like what was coming into or getting back from the database rather than just filtering what was already there, like the full list. And then quickly realized that seemed way too complicated and we could more easily do it just by filtering what we had on the front end. So to start off with, we also created the form, the input here, which is similar to what we had created last week. It has the semantic label and a text input. It's a controlled input, so the value is the value of search term, which is a piece of state we set up here. And then whenever the value changes in the input, it triggers the handle change function, which simply just updates the search term state with what the value is. And then in order to actually render only the data that matches the filter, what's in the search term, we have this filter data variable, which takes the data array and filters it to return only the items that include the search term. And we, like Davina was saying, we had we had converted them both to lowercase so that it would match, it would be case insensitive and check, match any case. And then that filtered list or filtered data variable is rendered down here as the individual list items. So whatever matches the filter, whatever matches the search term is what gets rendered down there. And actually what we first tried doing, which did work, but was, I think, more complicated than it needed to be, was creating a separate set or a separate piece of state for filtered data up here, and then trying to update that within the handle change function. And what happened was it was always one step behind because the search term wasn't actually updated when the filtered data state was getting updated. So if you typed in like G for Gruyere, it wouldn't do anything. And then if you typed in R, it would show everything that matched G only. So it was like one step behind. So what we then tried was adding a use effect hook and updating the filtered data state within that. So that like matched the rendering to match what was matching the filter, and that works, but again, a little probably too complicated for what it needed to be, because Ray pointed out very helpfully that we didn't actually need to have all that. We could just, as we mentioned, have a regular variable called filtered data that we render, and that does the same thing but with less less code. And then the last thing we had was we wanted to have the button to reset the form, and we only wanted to show up if there was something in the search box. So we have the search term here, and that and ampersand, so that this button only shows up when search term is truthy, or when search term is not like an empty string, basically. And that button, when you click it, calls the reset function here, which called prevent default, so that it doesn't reload the page, and then it simply resets search term to an empty string. And then that, of course, also resets the filter data to show the entire data list, and shows all of the list items. Any questions or comments?
Just want to say good job on I know it's like sometimes it feels like you're taking like the long route around to end up where you like wanted to start for some of this stuff, but like it almost like it is part of the process, and it had to happen for you to realize there was a better way. So I appreciate seeing that.
Totally agree. I think this issue is one that is very easy to just make it like really complicated, and it's easy to like, it sounds simple, but then you start thinking about it and you are like, wait, but I have to think about this and this and this, and add a lot of complexity. So being able to think through all of the complexity and then distill it and simplify it, I think is like a really great skill to have, and it shows like an ability to think through those problems. So that's awesome. Yeah, I guess my question is, what was the most difficult part about this issue? Like, was it the initial stage of trying to think through how you were going to work it, or was it more kind of that refining part of like, getting through the bugs and then fixing them? How did y'all feel
I
working through this issue?
For me, it was I think like I sort of had an idea of doing the filtering, how we would do the filtering, but then the like making the rendering match and stuff, that part I think was the trickiest. And figuring out a way to get around that. And I also just, as I was mentioning, like not trying to make things more complicated than they need to be.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd have to agree. It was for me, it was like coming in and thinking like, how do we, because like Emily had mentioned, we were both kind of like, okay, do we filter in the back end or, and then I think it didn't take us that long to come to the conclusion that like, actually, we could probably do this pretty simply in the front end, but like that initial like, okay, how do we approach this problem and not make it too complicated was the most challenging part.
Nice. Love it. Any other questions or comments from the team?
I guess I have a quick question about the bug that you were all finding where it was one step behind. Was that related to the fact it was based off of a use effect? Is that why it was one step behind? I missed exactly why that was occurring, if you guys figured that out.
I think it's like how React works when you use state, and then you use the set state, part of that. It like is something where it doesn't re-render until the next, or like updates the state, but it doesn't re-render that until the next render or something. I have a hard time like explaining it, but basically the idea is that it updates the state, but then it's not rendering, or it's not like triggering the re-render until it gets updated again. And that's why it's one step behind always.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think you did a good job of explaining something that is very confusing, Emily. Nice job. Cool. All right. Well, give it up for Davina and Emily. Very nice job. Lovely, lovely. And now we're going to pass it over to Lewis, and we're going to talk about accessibility and how to tell your story.
Okay, cool. So I believe the learning module for accessibility was like 2 weeks ago. And then the most recent one is the tell your story. So I think we can start with the accessibility one that we went over. So does anyone want to start with any thoughts, or maybe I can start with a question like, what are some things you learned from the module or that you started applying to this project, or other things that you'd like to apply in the future to your application?
Um, I can share real quick. Something that really blew my mind with the module was like the rough estimate of how many folks in the US alone are I think it was limited vision, or it was like some accessibility specific, but it was like as many people in the US as the entire population of Canada has, struggles with the sort of like assumption that we build websites like just for the sighted. And I think that like that's something that I find myself slipping on all the time with this. And I'm kind of frustrated that it slips my mind so much.
Yeah, I was gonna say um don't have like I haven't learned that much about accessibility so far, and that part of it I think is just because it seemed like really overwhelming. Like there's so many things to it feels like there's so many things to keep track of, like different types of things to keep in mind. And I really thought that the what was it called? Accessibility insight tool that he demoed in the video, I think that's what it's called, was really helpful for like, just getting a check on all the different things. I thought that was like a useful tool to like kind of get a sense of all the different types of things that you would want to keep in mind when thinking about accessibility.
I think one thing I took away was the reminder of how like accessibility looks a lot of different ways. And the little graphic, I think it was, and it might have been from Microsoft, that showed you like some examples of like the situational um uh accessibility needs for someone who is like, I think it I remember one that was like someone who has a heavy accent is most likely not going to be able to use like voice to text or voice to whatever options because our systems aren't built and designed to be able to process things like that. Or like I think he mentioned like new parents having like a baby in one hand and having to access everything with just one hand that's available. I think that was a really good reminder that not everything is about text to speech or yeah, text to speech as well. Or like screen readers. I think that was super helpful.
Yeah, I like that graphic a lot, especially for this project, since we're building a grocery list app. You're likely going to be using this in a grocery store, so it has to be, you have to consider it's going to be mobile friendly, and you're probably going to only use one hand to check things off. So something to think about.
I also liked how it covered like different levels of accessibility. Like, you know, it might be somebody who's maybe just like a little bit poor-sighted versus like somebody who's completely blind. So taking in consideration like everyone who might have accessibility and not just like the worst case scenarios. And also just the fact that like I also hadn't really considered accessibility too much when building applications before, and just the way that it's actually a lot easier than you would expect to integrate this into your program, and it would make it that much more easy for your users to be able to utilize your website.
Um, I think the one thing that I wish it did have more of, and more likely if maybe you were doing like a mini course on it, I wish it just had a little bit more in terms of suggestions and how to implement this accessibility. I know he mentioned that one of the websites has like a button to be able to skip somewhere down the page, but it's invisible to people who don't have like the accessibility options turned on. Um, I love knowing that, but I also like want more kind of concrete examples of how do I make things more accessible overall.
I think my short answer to that is use semantic HTML. It's like so underrated. But yeah, I think that's really good feedback for us to like give more of those like applications of accessibility.
And there
Um,
there are standards too, like there's the AA standard and AAA standard, and I know you can look those standards up online. I can't remember the exact URL, but it can go in detail to exactly what you need to do to make sure your website is um, reaching those criteria for accessibility. I can try to send that later. And sorry, go ahead, Shane.
Oh, all good. I was gonna mention something that occurred to me. Like I was sort of like panicking a little bit while watching the video because I was like, I haven't been thinking of this nearly enough for like all of my projects, like in general. But then there was a little bit of it was helpful to find that just following the semantic HTML general, like I call it like sort of like common sense, but it's not common sense. It's like knowing that a button has inherent things to it that a div doesn't. That helped calm me down a bit because it's like, okay, I've been using buttons as buttons. I haven't been forcing sections to be buttons for no specific reason. So it feels like some of these things you have to try hard at really breaking some of the like better wisdom that came before us that were like writing HTML guidelines a while ago. You know, as long as I follow what they're suggesting to do, it really is not so panic inducing.
Well, yeah, I agree. So if as long as you use the correct elements, you're like 50, 60, 70% of the way there. So that's really helpful. Mhm.
I had seen the name Aria before. I was not aware that was sort of like a really only use this if you need it, if you can't solve the problem otherwise sort of set of tools. But it was that also helped just knowing that like I don't need to overcomplicate it with another entire syntax, within my HTML elements. I can kind of just
Mhm.
find those use cases as I go.
Was anyone else anything else, or do you want to move into the next learning module? Uh, so the next one was how to tell your story. And the video on this was from a recruiting uh a recruiting person from Netflix, and they talked about different tools you can use to kind of showcase yourself during the hiring process. And so what are some thoughts that you all had from that presentation?
Really
What
appreciated that. Oh, sorry. I really appreciated that she like talked about different pathways that we could talk about when we're like explaining our stories. So like, some of us might have a linear journey that we can talk about, while as other people might not have something that they can explain. First I did this, first I did this. They might use like the pathway. I forget what it was, like the touchstone, I think, where you're like highlighting specific like wins and stuff. I really enjoyed like and thought it was helpful that she had different ways to tell a story, and like even maybe you have multiple different stories depending on like who you're hiring or like who's interviewing you. So I thought that was really helpful.
I definitely like the idea of sort of like getting a chance to like tell our unique perspective on things and sort of like our unique path on like into the industry. I struggle with this, I think, because it's sometimes it's hard to tell when is the appropriate time to talk about something that is not tech related when you're approaching your first like job in the field. It's hard to make that pivot from your previous experience to something tech related. I try to just focus on like people and like how I interact with people, but that I don't know, I get rambly. I guess I'm just expressing that it is tricky to really nail the movements through interviews or conversations with this stuff sometimes.
I will
Well, I think
say, oh,
I was
go ahead, Lewis.
gonna say I think soft skills are just equally as important as technical skills. So you can always showcase that, like you said, communication, teamwork, and management, things that you do quite well. So that's something you should be able to use in your hiring process.
If anyone didn't watch this, like hasn't had a chance to watch this video yet, I highly recommend it. I think telling your story is foundational, especially if you're a career changer, in just like how you approach the entire job hunt. So it's really difficult, but put like investing time into thinking through how you're going to connect those dots and how you're going to present yourself, I think is like pretty much the whole thing of how you market yourself to a recruiter. Um, like what I tell people is that your story makes sense to you because you've lived it, but for a recruiter, they might not necessarily be able to connect the dots. And so it's your job to do that because like they're looking at so many candidates, they're not going to put in the extra effort. So if you can do that for them and show them why you're like, why this is just a natural progression in your career, why you're a natural fit, and everything you've been doing has been leading to this, I think it really helps to sell your case.
Maybe I want to add something also. So whenever you have like big project or complicated project, maybe you can try to take a note. So one day maybe you will need come back again to tell a story about that one. It will be very helpful when you have like interview. So trying to kind of like notes all your story before you make a story, something like that.
There was one part where she mentioned, I think this was in the section about the toolbox with like the writing, the portfolio, and the website. And she mentioned that like when we have links, we should always give them a reason about why they should click and go look at that link. I guess I'm trying to figure out how to synthesize that in terms of like a resume. Is she suggesting that we have links and then like little descriptions next to it besides what the link links to? Because I feel like it can get a little overwhelming at some point if like every link has like a you should go here because this is blank.
I don't usually put links on my resume, but except for my own personal website or LinkedIn. So, and then I would probably have any links on there. I would probably have it for a certain purpose. Like I would obviously put links to all my demo projects or links to my like GitHub or portfolio and something. I probably wouldn't add links to things that are not super relevant. I guess like company links that are like companies you worked at. I wouldn't usually put that because that's pretty easily searchable. Um, so like mostly just putting out work that I've done is what I would use links for.
Yeah, I think sometimes like it can be an implied reason why they're clicking on it. I don't necessarily, especially on a resume when space is so valuable, I think it's okay to, not necessarily explain. But I think the point is that you don't want to just like spam a million links in there because that like it kind of like makes it less important. You want to just like very strategically, like Lewis was saying, like include links that are valuable and so that they don't have to figure out like which one should I follow.
Well, does anyone else have anything else they want to share?
I was just gonna mention that like I find marketing myself really, really difficult, like really challenging in a way that is frustrating for the job search because it's I don't know, every role you want to claim like you're the person for the job. But if you are humble at all, you know that there's so many people also competing that, maybe you're more middle of the pack in reality. And it sucks to have to like just make the bold claims anyway. When you know that it's tough out there. So it's this is just like something that I've been struggling with over the past like few months. It's like marketing yourself is tough. This is a skill that I need a lot more practice in.
I think
Yeah.
everyone's nodding their head, Shane. I think we all agree with you.
Yeah, think of it, it's almost like you have to be like well-intentioned and well-practiced and all that sort of good stuff, but also just a little bit more confident than reasonable at like the whole time. And it's like you just kind of have to do it anyway, and that's really tricky. That's really tricky to maintain.
When I don't think it's bad to be humble as well. Like you should practice having some of that confidence, but I think it is very appealing to a hiring manager for you to say like, yeah, I can learn a lot. I'm very quick, but I'm not perfect and these are some mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned along the way. Just like thinking about how to show some vulnerability. Um, I think if that's already coming naturally to you, that's a good thing. And just work on the confidence part. But people they don't want someone who is like completely full of bravado and everything. So I think it's good that you're coming from a place of like having some vulnerability.
I think preparation is also like one of the biggest steps because they're always going to ask you like what's a project that you struggled with or what's a project that didn't go as you planned. So writing the answers to that before the actual interview will help you be prepared for those types of questions so you're not ever thrown off track in an interview question. Okay. If no one else has anything else, we can move on to the issues, I believe, right?
Okay, let's go to the issue. 1 second. Okay, so we are going to the week 4, which is issue 8 and issue 9. Shen and Emily and then Andre with Davina. I will start with the issue 8 here. Okay, so this one as a user, I want to see a welcoming prompt to add my first item if my list is empty to help get oriented to how the app works. And yeah, when a user start a new list, they need a little bit guidance on how get started. Think through what you want to see a user and make some intentional user experience decisions that will guide our user in confidently adding their very first item. And yeah, the acceptance criteria. So the list view when there are no items to display should show a prompt, maybe example button for the user to add their first item. So at this one, maybe you can try to think like how prompt it will be helpful to help the user whenever they don't have any list at the beginning. So try to think like as a user perspective, like what can be helpful for the user if you don't have anything at the beginning, something like that. And yep. So this is for the first issue, and then second issue will be for Andrea and Devina. This one as a user, I want to mark an item on shopping list as purchased so the app can learn how often I buy different items. For the summary, user needs a UI that allows them to mark, maybe it should be like a checkbox, their items as purchased, so they can track what's on their list they do and do not need to buy. So the acceptance criteria, the list item component renders a checkbox with a semantic label. And checking off the item in the UI also update the date last purchase and also the total purchase properties on the corresponding Firestore document. The item is shown as checked for 24 hours after the purchase is made. For example, we assume the user does not need to buy the item again for at least 1 day. So after 24 hours, the items will be unchecked itself, so the user can buy it again. And the update item function in Firebase has been filled out and sends update to the Firestore database when item is checked out. I'm not sure it's already filled out because when I see the code in here, maybe you might need to update this function, update item. And also in the README, there is also the data property. You can like refer all the time what's the data looks like for the Firebase. And yeah, the notes, while you need to update multiple parts of Firestores for this feature, do not worry about the date next purchase yet. That will be addressed in the future issue. And also you can use the Firestore console to test the feature is working correctly by manipulating the value of the date last purchase. So you can update the Firestore. Don't forget to try around with the data. And yeah, do you guys any specific question? Or Louis, Kathleen, do you want to add something for this issue? Anything to add?
So the mentors we were talking about, issue 8 looks very sparse. And so this one is going to be one that is a little bit more of a first opportunity for you to dip your toe in the UI world, because I know we've been telling you to ignore that thus far. Make sure you're staying in scope, but this is a little bit of an opportunity for you to flex your UI chops a bit and think about, what has been kind of clunky about the experience when you've been testing and everything, and how can you make that a little bit easier on the user. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to us and we can help give you some guidance.
Cool.
Great. Okay. We've got a few minutes here at the end. Does anyone have any questions about anything, any of the issues that we assigned? Any follow-up thoughts about the learning modules, or anything like that? If not, we can go ahead and just preview our week ahead and then send you off to do your thing. Let me pull up our project brief. And all right, so this week, week 4, can't believe we're already on week 4. So we're going to be working on issues, sorry, yeah, 8 and 9 this week. And you already have your pairs. You should have your threads on Slack now. So we'll have our sync next Sunday. Or sorry, this is our sync next Sunday. And office hours I'll be hosting. I sent out a Slack message with the scheduling link, so make sure you try and fill that out today if you can, so we can get that scheduled for this week. And then our learning module this week is going to be what to include on your LinkedIn profile. Just like we've been doing, we won't be discussing this next office hour, or sorry, next weekly sync. We'll be discussing a batch of 2 in a couple weeks, because this upcoming week we'll have retro. So just following the same pattern. Hopefully no surprises there. If you'll have any questions, we're here. Yeah. And oh yeah, Shane, I see your comment. That's totally fine. And if you can't make it, also understandable. I know y'all are busy, so office hours are optional. Just want to make sure y'all remember that. But questions are welcome anytime in office hours or outside of office hours. All right, if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and wrap early today and send you on your way. Have a good week, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
y'all.
Bye.